Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. This is a compressed, structural companion to the deep dive. This is not a summary. This is not advice.
So, let's dive right in by challenging a really common idea. We tend to talk about globalization as if it's some kind of unstoppable force of nature, right? Like gravity or the weather. But what if it's not? What if it's more like a political project, something that was designed and built on purpose?
And that's exactly the argument we're exploring today, based on the work of Panitch and Gindin. The core idea is that globalization wasn't just some accident of history. It was a deliberately designed system, and the chief architect, the American state. Now, this completely reframes how we think about the word empire. When you hear that word, you probably think of military bases, of the Pentagon, of the CIA. But this argument says, look elsewhere. The real tools of this empire, the real engines of power, aren't military. They're financial. It's the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve that are running the show.
This brings us to a really key concept: institutional architecture. It sounds complex, but it's pretty straightforward. Think of it like this. The U.S. state didn't just participate in the global economy, it drew up the blueprints for it. It created this whole framework of rules, organizations, and norms. Things like the Treasury, the Fed, the IMF, that basically dictate how money moves around the planet.
Okay, so that leads to the obvious question, right? Why? Why go to all the trouble of building this massive global system? Well, the answer comes down to some incredibly powerful incentives.
The core logic was pretty simple, really. Create a world that looks and acts like America's version of capitalism. The whole point was to make sure capital, money, could move freely across borders, to get other countries to adopt US-style economic models. This created a much more predictable and, for sure, a much more profitable playground for American-led finance and industry. It was about building one big, open-for-business global marketplace.
So you designed this high-speed, interconnected, global financial system. What do you get? What's the predictable outcome? Well, you might think it's stability, but you'd be wrong. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite.
And you can just see it playing out across recent history, from the weird stagflation crisis in the 70s to the Asian financial crisis that spread like a virus in the late 90s, all the way up to the massive global meltdown in 2008. The takeaway here is that these huge crises, they're not accidents. They aren't bugs in the system. The authors argue they are recurring, totally predictable features of its design.
And hey, don't just take our word for it. This is a quote from Robert Rubin, a guy who was literally running the system as Treasury Secretary. He's saying it right there. The people in charge knew the system was inherently unstable. They understood that markets have a built-in tendency to go to excess, to create bubbles that will inevitably burst. It's just what they do.
So this is the crucial pivot. If you know the crises are going to happen no matter what, you stop focusing on preventing them. It's impossible. Instead, you focus on containing them. The main job of the U.S. Treasury and others wasn't failure prevention, it was failure containment. They became the world's firefighters, rushing in to manage the fallout and make sure the whole system didn't burn down.
Which leads us to a really fascinating question. If this system is so prone to crisis, if it's constantly blowing up, why does it keep going? Why doesn't it just collapse?
The answer, believe it or not, is baked right into the architecture of the system itself.
The system has these really powerful lock-in mechanisms. Think about it. Every time there's a crisis, who does everyone look to for a solution? The U.S., acting as the crisis manager. And because the U.S. dollar is the foundation of the whole global economy, everyone else basically has to play along. It creates this wild feedback loop where every crisis that's successfully managed actually reinforces America's central role and makes the system even more entrenched.
And this right here, this is the absolute core insight. The real crisis in perception is that we see these huge financial shocks and we think, oh no, the system malfunctioned, it broke. But Panitch and Gindin are telling us to see it differently. The system didn't break. It worked exactly as it was designed to. We're treating the symptoms, the crashes, without ever diagnosing the underlying condition that produces them.
So for our last piece here, let's just zoom all the way out and look at how this financial architecture weaves itself into everything: global politics, trade, and the very power of nations.
This table really lays out that global web. You can see the key players and their roles. You have the U.S. Treasury as the head architect, setting the rules of the game for everyone else. You have the Fed acting as the ultimate backstop, the lender of last resort for the whole system. And then you have institutions like the IMF and World Bank acting as the enforcers, making sure everyone, especially developing nations, sticks to the rules. It's a deeply interconnected machine.
And the end result of all this?
It's the creation of a single, integrated global economic system, an architecture that links pretty much every country on Earth, unifying them all under one set of rules that are written and managed from one central hub.
So, getting your head around the idea that this system was built, that it didn't just happen, is really the first big step. And it leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. If it was designed once, could it be redesigned? Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.